You can have $1 million portfolio, but if you owe half of it back to the bank, you don't have freedom. You have a payment plan. On this episode of The Capitalist Investor, we'll discuss the do's and the don'ts of debt while you're headed into retirement. All right, welcome back, everyone. Hope everyone's out there doing well. As always, you have me, Diamond Hands D, and back by popular demand, Jack. How's it going, buddy?
Doing good. Happy and excited for round two. So
yeah, heck yeah.
A good one.
Well, good. Well, hey, Tony's out on assignment this week. Hopefully in better weather than we're getting here in Cleveland. But yeah, obviously lots going on in the world. So I thought it would be good to do kind of a more planning episode as we kind of digest all of that going on in the world. But wanted to talk debt in retirement, because this is a topic that I think a lot of people have kind of like preconceived notions on. Whether it needs to be like an all or nothing solution to your debt. There seems to be some thoughts out there. So I thought it would be a good idea to kind of run through, the goods and the bads of debt, and kind of, give people a guideline on kind of what they should be looking at, as they head into retirement.
Yeah. So I think the sort of gist that I get is that debt can always help businesses grow. It's, kind of been something that businesses use to grow as time goes on, and they can take on debt to expedite that growth. Mm-hmm. But it can also quietly turn into, your biggest threat for independence. So why does debt become more dangerous as you approach retirement?
Yeah, those are good thoughts, and that's a good question. It's really pretty simple, kind of, in my opinion. It's really just time. As you get closer to retirement, you have less earning years, so you're probably going to get onto a more like fixed income plan. Obviously, as you get closer to retirement, so and then into retirement, so your earnings window is basically shrinking. So basically, if you're just adding a bunch of new debt on top of debt that you might already have as you approach retirement, that's going to hinder your cash flows pretty good. You're going to be dedicating more of your cash flow to that debt service than maybe that you want, and that can lead to stress and your financial plan kind of not working. You have less time to refinance as well. So there's kind of the interest rate risk. The less years you have to pay things off, you're kind of more, constrained on the interest rates that you can do, and, different types of loans, things like that. So at a certain point in time, you might just have to pay off the loan that you have. So you lose the ability to refinance that and all that good stuff. But I think the main point I like on this first subject is retirement's supposed to be fun, right? Retirement, you're supposed to do all the things that you've been saving up for.
That is the goal. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you have big debt, and we'll talk about the different types of debt here kind of in the next couple sections. But when you have those massive debt payments, it's going to hinder your freedom in retirement, and that's really what it's all about. I know we always come back to this, but that's kind of why the financial plan is so important. Debt service in retirement is another subject that can be handled by a good financial plan. So, that's why we use a cash flow based planning system, because we need to see how those cash flows look as we're approaching retirement. Make sure all the ratios are looking good. And as always, make sure your Monte Carlo score looks good. So that's kind of your probability of success. We want to make sure that's at least 70% score, 70% working plan. But I always like to try to get that up to 80%.
Makes sense. And I mean, you kind of touched on it just in that spiel there. It's, debt can be a double-edged sword, especially for business owners. You can obviously use it to leverage and build your wealth fast, but it can destroy it right before the exit. So should business owners have additional concerns when it comes to debt? Like, what should they be thinking about?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think, business owners are, a different breed, I would say. It's, it takes a lot of courage, I would say, to, start your own business, and then a lot of sweat equity to get it off the ground. So, as you're building up that business, you probably accumulate debt, right? And it's really about an exit strategy when you're a business owner. So, that's kind of what we do here at Strategic Wealth. Honestly, we work with a lot of business owners. Mark Tepper is working with a lot of those types of people. And whenever we're talking, exiting from a business, that's really the retirement plan too, right? Because you probably have this asset, this business. You probably have a bunch of debt associated with that business, and the only way to get cash out of that is to sell that business. So, having a game plan to exit the business as well as exit the debt is really, really important when you're a business owner. And then figuring out, if you get that, big lump sum of cash, how you're going to use that to sustain yourself through retirement. And, I think the last thing I'll say on this one, it's so, Jack, you probably don't even know this quote since it's from so long ago, but Mike Tyson used to say, "Everyone."
I know Mike. I know Mike.
Well, you probably know him from like The Hangover and different podcasts and stuff. But back when he was a boxer, he said, everyone has a plan until you get punched in the face, right?
Yeah, I've heard this quote.
You know that one? All right. So it's great to have a plan, but selling a business is a major event. As a lot of things need to line up. So having a good plan and a good strategy around selling that business is going to be, so important for those business owners. But as part of your overall retirement plan, you also have to make sure you're managing the business side debt separately from your own personal debt. That's kind of where, we see a lot of trouble, a lot of stress when they're kind of commingled. It's hard to unwind all of that. So, and it can also lead to bad, situations too. So you don't want to have to be forced to sell.
For sure. And I think, it's important that we highlight that not all debt is bad debt. But near retirement, I think it's important that people understand that every dollar of debt needs to have its purpose. It needs to be working towards something. So do people need to get rid of all their debt before they can retire?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and that is one I get. Quite frankly, it's probably one of the most common questions I get, whether it's from a client already or someone just talking to us for the first time. They kind of want to know, hey, should I pay off my mortgage as I head into retirement, or do I need to be debt free before I can get into retirement? And the answer is definitely no on that one. It's really important as you think about debt and what is good debt and what is bad debt. You don't necessarily need to pay off your mortgage before you go into retirement. I've had lots of clients who buy a different house, the downsizing, right? But the downsized house always costs a lot more than the house that they're leaving. So they're taking on new debt. And as long as that, that fits into the financial plan, that's just fine. You don't have to just eliminate debt. You should continue to use debt to your advantage, even in retirement. But what you do not want to do is confuse the home debt, mortgage. You don't want to look at that the same way as you're looking at like credit card debt, like lifestyle debt. Pulling out money too quickly early in retirement is another big mistake. So whether you're pulling the money out or if you're just piling up big credit card bills, right, is basically the same thing. And that's what people need to realize. I will say probably one of the most harmful things to a financial plan is trying to get into retirement, when you have a bunch of credit card debt, HELOC debt, for maybe like remodels of your house, things like that. So debt not related to your primary residence can be tough to overcome. So, sometimes people have to work a little bit longer to get rid of some of that. And sometimes a debt reduction plan is kind of the first step to your retirement plan. And I have seen that all over the board, quite honestly. And what I mean by all over the board is people with, $500,000 saved for retirement. I've seen this problem with them, and people with $3 million saved for retirement. I've seen the same problem with them. So it's really about knowing your lifestyle, being comfortable with it, and making sure that your financial plan has a strategy to pay for all of those things in retirement. So debt isn't necessarily bad on its own, but it can get bad, and it can be a pretty big hindrance to getting into retirement.
Do you have any quick rules on debt that maybe could help some people when it comes to managing their debt for primary residences or credit cards that you kind of give your clients hey, this is a quick rule for me, you should only have so much debt for your income?
Yep. So that is a great question. And I feel like there's lots of these little rules out there, rules to live by or whatever, like the 4% withdrawal rate from your retirement accounts. I feel like, though, as we move through time, a lot of those become more obsolete, if you will. Unfortunately, I'll have to give you a boring answer on this one. There's not really a ratio per se,
because everyone's different.
Exactly right. Yeah, everyone's going to be spending different. So, the amount that you're paying towards debt service, they always say that should be about a third of your income. That's kind of while you're working. So I'll give you a little bit more than just the generic. It depends on your plan answer. Once you get over a third of your income, that's probably where things can lead down a bad path.
Gotcha. Well, thank you for all that, Derek. There was a lot of good info in there, and you certainly taught me a lot about how to manage debt going forward as my life continues. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for joining me again this week. And thanks everyone out there for listening. If you guys have any questions or comments, ideas for a show, hit us up at info@swpconnect.com, and we'll talk to you next week.
The opinions expressed in the podcast are for general informational purposes only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any investment, legal, financial, or tax strategy. It is only intended to provide education about the financial industry. Please consult a qualified professional about your individual needs.